Welcome to the African Economic Conference, which is being held this year in Cabo Verde, from the 2nd of December to the 4th of December. This year's event focuses on the theme, financing the post-COVID recovery. And it comes at a time when most African countries are struggling to finance their recovery from COVID. The pandemic, although it was initially a health crisis, has really degenerated into more of an economic crisis for African countries as policymakers and leaders have struggled to finance the expenditures related to supporting people whose lives and livelihoods have been affected by the pandemic. Social spending has increased. Governments have provided low interest rates to businesses to keep them afloat. But as they have done this, their own revenues have shrunk because of diminished demand, global demand for products. So what has happened is that countries are experiencing rising fiscal deficits and increased debt to GDP ratios. And if this should continue, countries' capacity to achieve the SDGs, which was already compromised before the pandemic, this situation will further worsen. So the objective of this meeting, of this conference, is to get as many ideas together on how Africa can sustainably finance its recovery from the pandemic. But we're doing this by bringing in the youth. We want to hear the voices of the youth. African youth constitute a big proportion of the total population, but often their voices are not really heard in these policy discussions. What the AEC does is to provide a platform for young minds, young experts, to share their research findings with policymakers. And in so doing, to really create a bridge between ideas, policy change, and implementation. So the key value add of the AEC is really providing a platform for the youth to network with policymakers, to share their research findings, and hopefully to get some of these ideas and policy findings into the policymaking and implementation frameworks of member states. It also affords us as ECA an opportunity to showcase our own work, our own policy research, and to link this up with policymakers as we normally do. But this interaction also with the youth gives us an opportunity to identify potential recruits into ECA, recruits that could reinvigorate our pool of experts and provide employment opportunities also for the young researchers. So going forward, we hope that this event will be a key catalyst in generating new ideas on how Africa can recover from the pandemic, taking into account some of the new ideas that are coming from the youth. The just concluded COP26 meeting also throws into light the importance of linking the recovery to sustainable activities, taking into account issues of climate change. And so some of the panels will also be focused on the issue of climate change and how Africa can capitalize on the opportunities that climate change offers for green recovery. Currently, there is a big pool of resources that is looking for investments in climate recovery or climate investments, particularly from the private sector. But out of the about $500 billion that is really out there seeking investments in green investments in globally, Africa accounts only for 1% of this. And so we hope that this conference will provide an opportunity for African governments to structure projects that can be financed by the private sector as part of the recovery process. We know that currently about 40% of Africa's total debt is really debt that is accruing or is to creditors from the private sector. What this means is that over time, Africa is becoming less and less dependent on financing from bilateral and multilateral sources, but more and more from the private sector, because its financing needs are much more than what can be provided through these bilateral and multilateral sources. So increasingly, Africa is looking to capital markets as a source of financing. And this is really the new wave in terms of how the financing structure or landscape of Africa is going to look like going forward. To this extent, one of the panels is actually going to be looking at how do we access private financing, but at affordable rates, because we know that financing from private sources is not concessionary, it is at higher cost. But African countries tend to pay what is called a premium or much higher rate for borrowing from private sources. And ECA, working together with the private sector and investors, has been exploring ways to reduce this cost of borrowing from the private sector by creating opportunities that lower the risk, or what is called the liquidity risk associated with holding bonds that are issued by the private sector. So we really hope that this event, and we're confident that this event, which comes at a very critical time in Africa's development experience and trajectory, is going to open up windows of ideas, opportunity that can translate into policies, concrete policies to address the looming debt challenges that African countries face. But it's not only about financing development projects. We are also asking the question, how do we ensure that these development projects that are financed either through concessionary resources or through debt, commercial debt, actually translate into increased, inclusive, and sustainable growth? Because it is only then that debt will actually lead to development and that debt will be sustainable. If these resources do not translate into growth, it's inclusive growth, then debt will only pile up without any visible returns on that debt. So we're looking at issues of governance, the necessary reforms that ensure that for every dollar that is mobilized or borrowed, the return on that dollar investment is much higher than that dollar that is borrowed. It is in that context that debt becomes a productive source of investment into our futures. So we count on all stakeholders to actively participate in this event, share their ideas, and for the young researchers, we at ECA provide a journal as an outlet for their research to be published. So in effect, the contributions of the youth are harnessed by ECA into published research or published articles that then actually promote and nurture the career advancement of these young scholars. Going forward, we will continue to evaluate and assess the effectiveness and usefulness of the African Economic Conference to see how we can make it even better in the years to come. It is only by this continual assessment process that the AEC will continue to be an event that all policymakers and the youth would look forward to participate in, and that will continue to be of relevance to Africa's development trajectory. So I thank you very much, and I look forward to your active participation, either virtually or in person. This year's event, unlike last year's, is going to be hybrid. Last year was a landmark event in the organization of the AEC because it was the first time that the event was held in a hybrid manner. In a virtual manner, completely virtual manner. We are transitioning back to a semblance of normality by holding this event in a hybrid manner, and we hope that in the subsequent years we'll be back to the fully in-person organization of this conference. But we believe that this transition back to normality will be a successful one, given the importance of the subject matter and the caliber of participants and presenters and panelists that will feature in the event. I look forward to a very productive event this year. Thank you very much.